It's past 6. A number of MPs in Australia are calling for the nation to consider nuclear energy if we're to get out of coal generated electricity, or for that matter, gas powered. And they have an unlikely ally. British author and former spokesperson from Extinction Rebellion in the UK, Xeon Lights, believes that the transition to nuclear energy is apparently the best way to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, Xeon Lights is a former spokesperson for the climate activist group Extinction Rebellion. She's been speaking today in Brisbane about the case for going nuclear or going extinct. Xeon Lights, welcome to the studio. I want to ask you, first of all, have you parted ways with Extinction Rebellion?
Pleasure to be here, and yes, I have.
Why?
Well, I wanted to focus on talking about solutions, which is something that environmental groups often don't do. And in my role as a spokesperson, I couldn't do that. So I had to very clearly, step away publicly to show that I'm now speaking for myself and not a representative of the organisation anymore.
They're a very motivated group of mostly young people, but not entirely, very worried about the health of the planet, very strong advocates for renewable energy sources. Why leave that? The government, the state government here, is very focused on building more renewable energy sources. Why leave a group that's focused on that?
Actually, that's a misunderstanding. Extinction Rebellion doesn't support any specific technologies. They have 3 demands, and those are their only demands. That's what I was a spokesperson for. And the reason I left is because I wanted to talk about solutions, and there wasn't space to do that in the movement.
What are the 3 demands of Extinction Rebellion? Because they're active in this city as well.
Okay, number 1, they want governments to declare climate emergency. Number 2, they want you to declare net zero and protect biodiversity. And number 3, they want to change the political system. They want to replace the current system with citizens' assembly. So that's probably their main demand. So they want political change first.
And they don't suggest a particular form of technology to generate electricity.
They do not, but there are groups inside Extinction Rebellion that might promote specific renewables or rewilding. There is a group that does that, but there is no policy in Extinction Rebellion. It's just the 3 demands.
Rewilding mean more trees, more nature,
Yes.
End of sort of modernity in a sense.
Rewilding, I think, actually can mean different things, but my understanding is it's often reforestation, introducing species that have maybe been made extinct by humans, and changing use of land away from agriculture towards nature.
And you, as Xeon Lights, as quite a prominent spokesperson for them in the UK, said, "Sorry, I'm out of here. We have to talk solutions."
I did it publicly on television during a slot that I had on the Andrew Neil show. He's known as quite a forensic interviewer, and he asked me what we were going to replace the gas with. And I sort of couldn't get around the question because I wanted to say nuclear, but as a spokesperson, I couldn't. And so I just said, I'm not here to offer you solutions. And the clip went viral, and I decided that was the moment to step away.
This is the state of Queensland. It generates a massive amount of money on a number of sources of resources, 2 big ones being coal and the other one being gas. How could we step away from them and generate enough electricity without having the lights turned off?
Well, you're also investing in renewables, which can be part of the solution. I think the problem that you have is that you're only trying to build renewables and aiming for 100% renewable transition. That's not likely to happen. That no large industrialized grid in the world has managed to make that work. And actually, if you look at what's happened in Germany, that experiment has failed. I think it's good that you're moving away from coal and gas, but I think you need to sort of prioritize it. And coal should be the first. That's kind of the worst culprit. Even if you're not concerned about climate change, obviously I am. Even if you're not, the air pollution from fossil fuels is actually really quite bad. It kills millions of people a year. I think that's a good reason to move away from it. And there's this report that was done recently that we were discussing earlier today, which shows that actually a lot of the coal-fired power station sites are perfect sites to convert to nuclear because you sort of have a lot of the infrastructure there already, and it would create a more easy transition as well for workers who are already working in those areas, because essentially when you build anything, if you build nuclear power plants, you need welders and builders, and actually my understanding is you have quite a lot of those already because you have that coal industry.
we have quite a sort of a well-skilled engineering workforce in Australia. In fact, they do very well around the world. So my guest is Xeon Lights. So Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and other government members have ridiculed the idea of nuclear power at the moment. You're an environmentalist who's happy with renewable sources. Why do you think it's worth seriously considering, other than the fact that you could put it where the old coal-fired power stations were? What are the other elements that make it a worthwhile prospect?
Well, first of all, no large industrial grid in the world has been able to decarbonise without nuclear. Even somewhere like Sweden, where they get about 40% from hydro, which is brilliant, they're geographically blessed in that sense, they still have about 40% nuclear as well. France has shown that you can decarbonise with nuclear in the 80s, built over 50 reactors, took about 12 years, they fully decarbonised, and they've had a clean energy mix until today, sort of the envy of Europe now, where we're trying to meet net zero goals. They did it a long time ago. But mainly, I would say there's a scientific consensus that we need it. A lot of people aren't aware of this. When people talk about the consensus behind the fact that climate change is real and that it's human-driven, that information comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report produced by the United Nations. And those same reports have information about mitigation, which is how do we decarbonise? And all of those decarbonisation scenarios, the 4 main scenarios, show that you need a combination of nuclear and renewables. In varying amounts, it gives varying amounts, but that is the consensus. That report has a 99% consensus. So if you believe climate change is real and requires action, then you should also believe from the same scientists that nuclear is part of that decarbonisation transition.
The IPCC, the United Nations report, says nuclear needs to be part of the mix.
It's in the Global Warming 1.5 report. It was released in 2018, and it's a chapter on mitigation by Working Group 3. You've also got some amazing climate scientists like Dr. James Hansen. I don't know if you're aware of him over here.
No, I'm not. So.
He's very, very prominent, one of the first climate scientists to draw attention. I think he testified in Congress in the US to draw attention to the fact that climate change was an issue. He is very, very vocal on nuclear energy, saying we need it as part of the mix. He's written for The Guardian in the UK alongside other climate scientists like Professor Kerry Emanuel. And he's also produced a paper that shows that when you build nuclear power plants to replace fossil fuels, it saves lives. And in his paper, he calculated over 1,000 lives saved. And again, that was just looking at deaths from air pollution. So if you're an environmentalist, you should be concerned about these issues, and you should be following the science, really.
And the scientific consensus says that part of the decarbonisation process mix should be or has to be or could be nuclear energy.
It should be or has to be, yes, because you can build lots of renewables, but you still need a baseload power. So that coal works really well for that, but it's not clean. You need fossil fuels to back up when it's not very windy or sunny. I know people keep saying, well, Australia's sunny, but not at night. It's not sunny at night. And the issue is that there isn't storage enough to provide you a base load so if you have a really sunny day, you might have so much renewable energy that you can export it. But if you have a week with not very much wind, then you're just completely drained. And what do you do then? Well, this is what's happened in Germany. Germany made the choice to build lots of renewables. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. They invested billions. It brought down the cost globally. And they phased out their coal-fired power stations. Great, I agree with that. I think we should do that. But they also phased out their nuclear power plants because they were scared. 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi power plant meltdown in Japan, even though nobody was harmed by the meltdown, and even though you're not going to have a tsunami in Germany, the government was scared. The Green-led government decided to phase them out, and now they're in a position where they're reopening their coal-fired power stations. They're talking about having to frack again, lift their ban on fracking, because they've got no baseload power, and they were relying so heavily on imports of fossil fuels for that baseload power from Russia. Now that's been cut off, and the Nord Stream pipeline has been vandalized. They are actually rationing energy right now, wondering how they're going to get through the winter. Their energy prices have just soared. I mean, they've quadrupled in Britain, so it's bad in Britain too, but not as bad as in Germany. In Germany, they're talking about people not even having enough firewood for people's home fires to get them through the winter, and they have very cold winters. So it's worrying.
I'll come to that in a moment, but what's not been highlighted here in Australia is the difference between Germany and France. So everyone knows about Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine and cutting off the gas to Germany. but Germany shut down their nuclear power stations. France did not, meaning that France doesn't have the same energy crisis today that Germany and the UK do. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, France has some other issues where they had some maintenance issues. So some of their reactors have gone offline because of the pandemic. But they'll be back online for the winter. So now there's this kind of argument happening within Europe where there's an energy treaty. So if there's a country that needs energy, normally it's supplied by another country. Well, there's even some people saying, should we be sending it to Germany when they've shut their own reactors? Ukraine and France have been supplying nuclear energy to Germany, so you can understand why they say that. But I think it's really sad that it's kind of eroding that democratic alliance that has existed for a long time. But ultimately, if that power gets shut off, people will die. People will die in a cold winter in Germany if they can't heat their homes. But that's the situation we're all in now. We're all being impacted by it. And, in Britain, we're making a different decision. We have cross-party agreement to build nuclear power stations. Labour has a pro-nuclear policy in Britain. They're unionised jobs and they're very tied in with the unions. The Conservatives want to build more. The Liberal Democrats support it. So we are trying to build them. The problem we have in Britain is that we have a shortage of skilled workers. So it takes us a long time. We don't have the advantages that you have here. If you were to lift the ban on building new nuclear reactors here, you would probably be able to do it quicker than us, actually.
19 minutes past 6. Are you happy to take a couple of calls from listeners? You
Yes.
happy to do that? All right. Dominic from Haymarket, you have a question for Xeon Lights.
Yeah, I do, Steve. Thank you for taking my call. I'm actually from the Valley. I work for an engineering consulting company. I got to apologize. I haven't listened to the whole story. But one of the key things that the people aren't taking into account with nuclear, we are comparing it to Europe all the time. I mean, obviously, the climate in Australia is a lot different to Europe. And also, Europe's had nuclear energy for a long time. So the big white elephant in the room is the waste from nuclear. No one has the ability to treat that in Australia. In Europe, they do. So I'm just wondering what the issue is going to be in regards to managing waste. And number two, your guest talked about how we have the capacity and the engineering prowess to build nuclear plants, but we don't have that. We don't have the expertise or the experience. We've got one small research nuclear facility.
And so where do we get our nuclear skill sets from?
Exactly. So nuclear skill sets,
Yep.
What do we do with the waste?
Okay, two reasonable questions. Dominic, thanks so much. So let's start with, first of all, the waste, because I'm one of those who nuclear energy scares me, for these and other reasons of accident, what have you. So let's tackle the waste issue. So what has France, Switzerland, Germany, before they shut it down, and the UK, when they had, I forget the name of the UK nuclear power station now, but what did they do about the waste issue?
Different countries manage waste differently. But first, I just wanted to preface this with saying that I was anti-nuclear for a long time. I don't know if people who are listening know this, but my history was actually as a very, involved environmentalist. I protested nuclear, actively. I wasn't just scared of it. I was actively putting people off it. I was afraid. So everything that I say now is very informed, where I've been able to step away from the fear and also kind of look at it in the context of fear, climate change and energy crisis, which actually kills people right now.
Sellafield, I think, was the UK.
Yeah,
plant.
well, that was a nuclear weapons facility.
Okay.
So
my apologies.
this is a thing. My fear also was confusing weapons with energy a lot of the time.
Okay, yep.
Plenty of countries have one and not the other. But anyway, so the waste, actually, nuclear waste is probably the most managed waste of any energy source. And that's for example, solar panels, they're not recycled. And people think that they're natural and they're fine and they put them in landfill sites, but actually they leach quite serious chemicals into those landfill sites like cadmium, so they should be recycled. I'm not saying that that's a reason not to have them, but they need to be recycled. But they're not managed. Nuclear waste is very well managed. I've been to visit nuclear waste. It's held in it's just these sort of small metal cylinders that are held in huge casks of concrete that you can hug it. You're not getting any more radiation than you would from sitting next to a person. People are naturally radioactive, as is anything that's living. And what I often say to people is, it's an interesting thing that we focus so much on the waste. And I think this came from the environmental movement that I was in, and we came up with it. But actually, right now, fossil fuel waste is being stored in the Earth's atmosphere. No one talks about it, and it is destroying. it's causing mass destruction, and we know that, and we know that we're breathing it in, and that it's making children sick. So we need to look at it in context, because, as I said, nothing is produced without waste. Everything requires some mining. Everything requires some produces some waste. How is it dealt with in different parts of Europe, differently in different countries? The UK actually sends a lot of its waste to France, where they reprocess it because they have the ability to do it. They're just so far ahead of everybody else. In Finland and Sweden, they've built deep geological repositories where you just bury it underground. You could probably do that with disused coal mines. So maybe you already.
There was a proposal by, I think, a company called Paladin Resources, I think, to do it up in Mount Isa, which is a sort of a slowly dying mining town here in far northwestern Queensland.
Right.
I don't know. All right, so that's the waste point, but the skills point is a big one. I mean, we have ANSTO, which is makes radioactive isotopes for medical purposes and scientific purposes in Sydney, in Australia. It's a nuclear facility. They have some skill sets there. They've had that since the 50s or 60s, but we would need a massive increase in nuclear engineers or nuclear electronic engineering.
You would need the engineers, but as I said, and you had an engineer speaking, but it's not, as I said earlier, it's not just engineers. Actually, a lot of it is the builders and the welders, people to pour the concrete, people to construct the really basic foundations, and then the engineers to focus on the more technical aspects. You do have those engineers here. You have ANSTO is a world-leading science and technology centre. It operates an advanced nuclear reactor, a world-leading reactor. It has waste on site that they store on site. I think a lot of people don't even realise this here.
In the middle of Sydney? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And you know something? It's stored in a shed because they're not allowed to move it around because of your laws, which prohibit.
Can't transport nuclear waste.
Yeah, so people worrying about the waste is actually making it more of a problem. It's easy to manage. It's. Look, everywhere has this issue. Even in France, there's some issues of some people moving to services industry, and then suddenly there's a bit of a deficit of workers. What I would say is we need, you just need to encourage people into those jobs, into those positions. In Britain, I think I've suggested it before, we should just have free apprenticeships and training. These are really good jobs. People want them, but it costs a lot of money and time to train people. But what the point really is, you're saying the caller said that it would take a long time because you don't have that in place. We don't have that in place in Britain, and we're operating nuclear. So it's it's all about ambition and what do you want to achieve for your country? Do you want good, unionized, well-paid jobs? Do you want your kids getting jobs in coal mines? I don't want my children to end up working in coal mines. Sorry, I'd much rather they worked at a nuclear power station. And that's the question, isn't it? I think it's a no-brainer.
All right, but I have to let you go in just a moment. One final question. The other the negative, if you like, is the actual cost of construction and the long lead times. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so this ties into what we were just saying about, do you have the workers? So the way that people in technology, often innovation is the way forward, but with nuclear reactors, actually, it's not. You just build the same design again and again. And so there is a study on this that was done in South Korea to look at how they make their reactors so quickly. So some places in the world, South Korea, Japan, they made them in 3 years. So technologically you can. They're absolutely safe. The reason that they could do it, what this paper showed, was that they use a standardization model, which means you have the same workers, kind of like getting Lego and creating creating a model out of Lego. And once they've done it once, they can do it a lot quicker the next time and a lot quicker. And it does bring down build time and cost significantly over time. So I agree, initially it might cost a bit more, but over time, you think France made over 50 reactors. And France, actually, people don't realize, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, France had the cheapest electricity to consumer in Europe for decades because that cost is paid off very quickly, whereas Germany has had the most expensive and is now in a severe energy crisis.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in studio. Xeon Lights.